My name is Katie Montgomery, and I'm the executive director here at the Essex Historical Society of Shipbuilding Museum. We are so excited to have David Robinson here to talk to us about underwater archaeology. I've had the pleasure of running into Dave through my work with Harold on learning about traditional ships, and having references to ships that have passed and still exist is so important. So it's really amazing to have this as a resource for people who want to learn more. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to you.
All right, Katie, thank you.
Thank you.
Wow. You know, as I was thinking about talking here tonight, it occurred to me, I'm on hallowed ground for a nautical archaeologist. You couldn't ask for a better venue and a better town to talk to folks about shipwrecks. Well, maybe shipbuilding would be the better thing to talk about. It's probably a touchy subject, but it's been a long time. It's been a long time. The pain of the wrecking events is gone. But thank you so much for coming out. Thank you for supporting the Historical Society and the museum. It's a real pleasure to be here. I was telling somebody before I left, I live in Southern Rhode Island, and it's a long ride up here, and the traffic was pretty bad coming up. But I told somebody, I said, you know, I love it up there. I wish I lived closer because it's such a great place. If you're interested in maritime history, this is, like, in my mind, the epicenter of all that. So thank you for inviting me to talk. Getting to share something that I am passionate about and I've dedicated my life to, marine archaeology, with folks like yourselves is an absolute pleasure, and it's one of the best parts of the job. So I've got lots to share with you. I've got lots of slides to go through. I'm going to give you kind of an introduction to a little bit to my background, so you get to know who your state underwater archaeologist is. How many of you knew you had a state underwater archaeologist? Not many people do. That's typically the answer I get. And so it's talks like this that I'm doing to try to change that. Because after you leave, you all know you have a state underwater archaeologist.
Why do you live in Rhode Island?
That's where I was born.
Well, you're a master state underwater.
I am your state underwater archaeologist. And I have a long commute, but my heart is here in Massachusetts. So don't worry. My grandfather was born in Charlestown. And so we used to come up and visit Mass all the time. Yeah. So I am the director of the Massachusetts Board of Underwater Archaeological Resources, as well as a state underwater archaeologist. My background, prior to becoming the state underwater archaeologist here 5 years ago, I was a marine research specialist at the University of Rhode Island's Graduate School of Oceanography, where we did a lot of submerged ancient landscapes work that I'm going to touch on in a little bit. I also, and most of my career, I worked as a consultant, as a submerged cultural resource management specialist. And what that is that's the person that gets hired by the companies that have to comply with federal and state law, companies like wind farm development companies. And they have to do offshore surveys before they build their projects. And I was the guy who was doing all that archaeology for projects like that. My educational background, I did PhD coursework at the University of Connecticut, focusing on submerged settlements archaeology. And then prior to that, I got my master's degree in nautical archaeology from Texas A&M University. Makes perfect sense, right? The kid from the ocean state goes to the Central Plains of Texas to learn about underwater archaeology. The world's first program in underwater archaeology was at Texas A&M. It was the best one when I went there. So that's why I went there. And then before that, I got my bachelor's degrees in anthropology and in art. And it's amazing how much that art degree has come in handy for moments like this when I'm putting together slide presentations and doing reports. I've worked 33 years as a professional underwater archaeologist, and that's taken me everywhere up and down the eastern seaboard, out to the Great Lakes. I spent 3 days submerged in the U.S. Navy's nuclear research submarine NR-1 at the edge of the continental shelf in the Gulf of Mexico, looking for submerged landscapes on a project that I did with Dr. Robert Ballard, the Titanic guy. It's also involved less glamorous projects like the hauling out of the old steamboat that used to be at Anthony's Pier 4, the Peter Stuyvesant, when they were developing the waterfront there. And getting to work on the Vasa. I was just talking to this gentleman about the costs of conserving and then curating shipwrecks. It's one of the reasons why we don't raise shipwrecks like we were early in the history of underwater archaeology. But that picture of me peering out of the gun port from the stern of the Vasa, that's a vessel that sank 400 years ago that is in one of the national museums in Stockholm and is a perpetual care kind of a situation. The ship wasn't supposed to last 400 plus years, and it's expensive to take care of a ship when it's out of the water. Yeah, so varied career, but most of the work that I've done here, and the reason why I'm your state underwater archaeologist, most of the work I've done in my 33 years has been in Massachusetts. The Board of Underwater Archaeological Resources celebrated its 50th birthday last year. It was created in 1973. And the board is the sole trustee of the Commonwealth's underwater cultural heritage. And we are charged with encouraging the discovery, reporting, preservation, protection of Massachusetts underwater archaeological resources. The board consists of 9 members, and there are folks who are appointed from a variety of different state organizations, like the State Archaeologist's Office, the State Archivist's Office, Director of DCR Waterways, Director of CZM, Coastal Zone Management, Director of the Massachusetts Environmental Police, and the Executive Director of MHC. And we also have, if you ever have an interest in serving on the board, we have 2 governor-appointed members, and anybody can volunteer to do this. 2 from the recreational diving community, and then 1 at-large marine archaeologist, some of whom you may know. That's Graham McKay, Executive Director of Lowell's Boat Shop. Our jurisdiction extends everywhere that you see kind of that light beige coloring around the state. It's the coastal waters out to the federal and state water boundary, as well as all the inland waters and wetlands. So it's a huge area to be responsible for. And we have one guy, one person to do it, and that's me. So you're probably wondering, okay, Mr. State Underwater Archaeologist, what do you do at BUAR? What are our tax dollars paying for? Well, we review about 1,500 projects a year. These are all the development projects that are impacting submerged bottomlands in the state. Make sure that they're to try to prevent any impacts to underwater archaeological resources. We also manage about 27 active permits right now, and we coordinate and I chair the 5 public meetings that we have each year. I also do a lot of programs like this. I do 15 to 20 public talks a year. In addition to the Shipwreck Scholars Program that we do with the trustees, we also do a Marine Archaeology Sunset Walk and Talk. In fact, I know they're scheduling a few of those now, and I think I just agreed to do one on June 8th. So if ever you want to come out and see the Ada K. Damon up close and personal and see a presentation beforehand, I highly recommend you come out with this. It's a really good time. In addition to the work that I do with the trustees, I also work with a group called DiveArc, and they're a group that gives veterans, Gold Star family members, and active duty military opportunities to reintegrate back into civilian life through missions. And in this case, we do archaeology and diving missions. In terms of field work, I do field work quite a bit during the year. Usually I get calls from folks like yourselves who find something and want to report it, and I go out and take a look at it. So I did 10 of these studies last year. I engage regularly with the state's tribes. We have 2 federally recognized tribes, the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe and the Wampanoag tribe of Gayhead-Aquina that I work with, as well as we do a lot of work with the Nipmuc tribe in Central Mass. And then I provide and receive technical advice and guidance from our sister state agencies and different federal agencies. So that's what we're doing. We're busy. I'm busy. If any of you are divers, are there any divers here? Quite a few. You and it doesn't have, you don't have to be a diver, but divers and citizen scientists like yourselves could apply for permits to do archaeological research in the state. We have 3 different kinds of permits. We have reconnaissance permits for non-destructive, non-disturbance surveys. We have excavation permits if you're going to recover artifacts. And then we also have special use permits that are issued to qualified marine archaeologists to do environmental review type studies. And our permittees range from everything from individual sport divers and people who are interested in history to professional marine archaeologists and corporate ventures. We have a few exceptions to our permits. We have things that are called exempted sites, of which we have about 40 in the state. And they're in that map that you see on the right there, the little yellow starred areas. These are sites that limited artifact collection is actually allowed. We also have isolated finds. If you were to find something and you wanted to keep it, you could report it to the state, fill out a form, and then the board would vote whether or not to allow you to keep that find, and you would have title to it. We also have underwater archaeological preserves where archaeology, the permitted archaeology that we typically do, unless it was just research, is not done. We have one site, the White Squall off of Coons Hollow in Wellfleet, that is in the preserve. And then we have the exception of the shipwreck Wida and its cargo, based on a court case that was settled a number of years ago. The work that was being done on that site predated the passage of the Abandoned Shipwreck Act in 1988. So in terms of what archaeological or underwater archaeological resources are here in Massachusetts, they're defined by law as abandoned properties, artifacts, treasure troves, or sunken ships that have remained unclaimed for 100 years or more, or they're valued at $5,000 or more, or any other objects that are 100 years old or judged by the board to be of historical value. And these resources can be, as I said, within inland or coastal waters of the Commonwealth. And title to these resources lies with the Commonwealth, so they belong to the citizens of the state. And this has been supported by the passage of the Abandoned Shipwreck Act in 1988, which removed historic shipwrecks from admiralty law and established U.S. ownership over all abandoned shipwrecks in U.S. territorial waters, and then transferred that ownership and management of abandoned shipwrecks from the federal government to the states, thus confirming our ownership claim. The exception are military vessels and shipwrecks in waters of tribal lands. The important part of the law is that it guaranteed recreational access to everyone to these wrecks. So oftentimes when I talk to diving groups, the question will come up, can we dive on these sites? And the answer is absolutely. They belong to you and you can dive on them. The law also provided some advisory guidelines for state programs, and something we should understand is that not all coastal states have a state underwater archaeologist or a board of underwater archaeological resources. Each state varies in how it deals with the Abandoned Shipwreck Act and how it manages its underwater heritage. Some of these offices are based like ours is in coastal zone management programs. Other ones are based in state historic preservation offices. And some programs are in universities and museums. Now, you may be wondering, if you were to collect something that was an underwater archaeological resource, is there a penalty involved? Well, I can tell you in reality, if you found something, the first thing to do is just bring it to our attention. Just get online. I'll give you the link to our website in a minute. You can just report it to me. I'll talk to you about it, and then we'll determine next best steps. The instances where you're going to have penalties and fines, it's only going to be if it's kind of a nefarious thing where a ship is being illegally salvaged and large pieces that are being taken, and that's going to be a major problem.
Is that you're referencing a root piano?
Maybe. I was I was the archaeologist that worked on that project and got to dive in the pond that it was in. And one of the more unique experiences was diving under this mat of about 3 feet of tree branches and roots and all kinds of weirdness. It was like a sheet of ice, but it was vegetative. And you could there was about a 3-foot space underneath that you could fit in, and it was dicey. And no, we never found the piano, but it didn't matter. Sox have won 4 times now. So the spirit was enough to carry the Sox. If you want to learn more about the board or get in touch with me, the best way to do it is just to Google BAUR, and our website the links to our website will pop up. And there's a whole lot of information on our website. But the most important thing for everyone here probably is this Shoreline Heritage Identification Partnership Strategy, or SHIPS form. It's a one-page form that you can download and then fill out and send it to us if you are walking along the shore and you see something and you think it might be archaeologically important. So I would love to hear from you. Just send me an email, say hello. That'd be great, because I do work for you and I have all of you in mind when I do the work that I do. All right, now the real reason you all came. North Shore shipwrecks. So you've probably noticed that in the news in the last year or so, there's been a lot of press on the shipwrecks here. There's the one that became exposed at Canomo Point, and there's another one that became exposed out in Essex Bay and actually in Gloucester waters. And then the Ada K Damon. How many of you are familiar and have seen the Ada K Damon? Quite a few, yeah. That's on Steep Hill Beach in Ipswich, and a big section of it re-emerged a few weeks ago and got a lot of people's attention. And as I've looked at these newspaper accounts, you know, I know the reporters all do the best job they can, but in reading them, I realized there's a lot of not so accurate information in there. And then also started to see posts popping up on Facebook with pictures of people climbing on the wrecks and making the presence of these wrecks known. And it occurred to me that probably it would be good if I came to this community and talked to you about these resources that are there, to try to clarify information about them, so that you had kind of the story from the horse's mouth, as opposed to reading it secondhand through news reports. Shipwrecks in Massachusetts, and let's see, I don't know how many you realize, but we have a lot of shipwrecks in Massachusetts state waters. There's over 3,500 reported vessel casualties in our waters. There's lots of good reasons why they're there. And the biggest reason is that Massachusetts, as you know, has been a maritime state, a maritime colony for really over 500 years, that Europeans have been coming here either to fish or to settle. And as a result of all that activity, we have a lot of shipwrecks, and we have a lot of cultural resources, underwater archaeological resources, not just off the coast, but also in the inland waters as well. In 2008, I did a study I talked to my predecessor, Vic Mastone, who some of you may know, who was the director of the board for 32 years before I became director. And BAR keeps a database of as many shipwrecks as we have records for. And I said to him, I said, has anybody ever done a statistical study on where are these things located? Why have they sank? When did they sink? Have we really taken a broad brush look at the wrecks in Massachusetts? He said, no. And I said, well, I'd like to do that. So I did. And just as a fun project. And what I found was that the shipwrecks in the state are not randomly distributed. They're actually located in places where land sticks out, or by old ports or very active ports. And it makes total sense, right? Where the ship traffic is where the shipwrecks are occurring. Also where there are hazards offshore. And what I found out was that there was kind of an average shipwreck for Massachusetts. And that was a vessel that was approximately 100 feet long and 300 tons, made out of wood, dating from the second half of the 1800s, less than 20 years old at the time of its loss, carrying fuel oil, coal, clay, lime, stone, or lumber and timber, or fish, destined for a Massachusetts port. It either stranded, burned, foundered, and this would have occurred most likely in the winter or fall off the coasts of either Gloucester, Rockport, Boston, or Nantucket. In addition to the shipwrecks that we have here, one of the other things that our office is concerned with are ancient native sites that are submerged offshore. And if you imagine back to the time of the glaciation, at the maximum, about 26,000 years ago, the entirety of the area that we're presently sitting was buried under ice, but the continental shelf further offshore was exposed land. and it was inhabitable, and there were trees and plants and animals and people that were out there. Since the height of the last glaciation 26,000 years ago, as the Earth began to warm, the glaciers melted and sea level rose some 400 feet from where it was then. And so that submerged the shelf and submerged all the sites that are located out on the shelf. They're hard to find, so it's a part of underwater archaeology that it's only been really developing in the last 20 years. Underwater archaeology as a discipline is only about 60 years old. The evidence that we have that these landforms exist offshore have been found serendipitously by fishermen dragging the bottom. So things like mastodon teeth and these deposits of peaty organic vegetation with tree stumps and tree roots in them have all been dragged up as far offshore as George's Banks. And then also in closer to shore, and these are examples from the coast of Maine, scallop dredgers dragging the bottom have brought up artifacts. So we know that these sites exist offshore. Oop. Man, firing on no cylinders today. There we go. And that's a horrifying picture. Who's the guy with the dark beard? So up until the early 2000s, when I was involved in doing the archaeology for the Cape Wind project in Nantucket Sound, that was the first time we'd actually done a survey where we systematically went out to identify these ancient landforms and sites and found them. We didn't find archaeological deposits, but we found the ancient landforms that they could exist in the form of a drowned ancient forest that dated from between 5,000 and 11,000 years old. The way we identify these sites, we use two really techniques. One is we look at sub-bottom profiling records, and that's what you see here. So we go out and we survey track lines that are parallel to each other, and we collect remote sensing data. And that record that you see there, it's a sound signal that goes down into the sediments and can penetrate, in some cases, down tens of feet below the surface of the seabed, and reflect back any of the relatively dense layers that are buried under the seafloor. So in this case, the seafloor is that second line, dark line. And below that, you see the red line that's ravinement. That's an old erosional surface from when sea level rose and eroded the landscape that had been there. The paleo channels, fills, those are old riverbeds. So we can use the remote sensing data to identify the old ancient landscapes and then go and core those landforms and document what's in the cores, sample the cores for microscopic evidence of human presence. And in this case, this is a member of the Mashpee, it's the Mashpee Wampanoag Tribal Historic Preservation Officer, Dave Whedon, looking at some samples from a core on a project that I worked with him on. And in this case, we've got little stone flakes that indicate that there are humans there making stone tools, as well as vegetation that indicates a terrestrial environment. Things like birch wood fragments. This is from the Cape Wind project area. Roots, seeds, all these little clues that tell us there was a landform there that survived. And from the work that's been done over the last 20 years here in Massachusetts and in Rhode Island, we know that there's situations where these old landforms tend to preserve, and it's in areas that were topographic lows that then inundated, they flooded, they filled in very quickly, and they were preserved below the wave energy. So we can actually kind of predict where these might be in the data. One of the other ways that we look for these sites is by actually looking, by going underwater and finding exposures of them. What you see here is one of our tribal colleagues hovering over a tree stump that dated to 3,500 years old, surrounded by root mat in a landscape that dated to 6,500 years old. So she's a modern indigenous person hovering over a landscape that was occupied by her ancestors thousands of years ago. This is not something you get to see every day. One of the big focuses that we're paying a lot of attention to now are the threats to coastal cultural resources from sea level rise related erosion. And not only the natural forces of sea level rise and erosion, but also our responses to those forces. Things that are involved in making coasts more resilient. And you all know, you live in this area, you know what the winter storms can be like and the erosion that takes place. In the 5 years that I've been in this job, I get reports that things are exposed and I go and I investigate those sites. So the map that you see on the right is a map that was produced as a part of the study that was done by Coastal Zone Management that identifies sections of the coast that are eroding more rapidly than other sections. So everywhere you see red, and you might notice that there's a lot of red on the North Shore, we have a lot of erosion taking place. So I compared that map, so the one that's inset here on the left, with the map that you see on the right. These are the sites that were reported to me that I've investigated over the last 5 years. What do you notice when you look at that? There's a bit of a correlation there, right? There's a lot of stuff that's appearing up on the North Shore where there's a lot of erosion. There's a lot of stuff appearing on the Outer Cape where we have a lot of erosion. And so, but it's not just in those locations, right? This is a statewide issue. You know, if we think of the reports of the winter storms in Situate pounding on the coast, threatening built resources, erosion in Quincy, threatening the southern tide mill. It's an old tide mill that's being undercut and undermined by erosion. Ancient native sites along the shore. This is in Chilmark. Up on this hill, there's a large archaeological deposit there that's threatened. This is in North Plymouth, where there was a wooden bow found, along with stone projectile points in an area of exposed ancient landscapes that have since eroded away. This is in Marshfield, again, an exposed ancient landform, on top of which is a shipwreck. Sometimes they go hand in hand. And then on the south shore of Nantucket, this made a lot of news last year when a shipwreck was exposed there by significant erosion taking place along the southern part of the beach. And as I said, not only are these resources threatened by natural forces, they're also threatened by the responses to them. So armoring coastlines with stone, dredging sand offshore and then blowing it onto the shore, and then doing more natural, less invasive types of stabilization programs on the coast. All these things have the potential to destroy the sites that we're trying to protect. So what's a state underwater archaeologist to do? And I'm going to share with you the story of the 80K Damon in a minute, but the North Shore has kind of like been ground zero for alerting me to the fact. It's been kind of the canary in the coal mine that we have a fairly significant problem that I don't want to react to. I want to proactively plan to respond to. And so colleagues of mine at CZM, we put together a proposal to NOAA and to their Projects of Special Merit grant program for this project, assessing the vulnerability of Massachusetts coastal cultural resources from coastal hazards and sea level rise. And I'm happy to say we got the funding, and the project started several months ago. The advisors that we have in that project include the City of Boston's Archaeology Program, the City of Quincy's Historic Preservation Office, the Egan Maritime Institute and Nantucket Shipwreck Museum, Mashpee Wampanoag Tribal Historic Preservation Office, and Department of Natural Resources, the Massachusetts Commission on Indian Affairs, the Massachusetts Department of Conservation and Recreation's Archaeology Program, Massachusetts Historical Commission, the Town of Nantucket's Historic Preservation Office, Trustees of Reservation and their Cultural Resources Office, and the Wampanoag Tribe of Gay-Headed Quail. We've got a lot of people that are helping us with this project. That's the advisory committee right now. My hope is that list grows and begins to include more people from this region. Because ultimately, we'll have success. Again, I'm one person in my role as state underwater archaeologist. I can't do the work that we do without the assistance and involvement of citizen scientists like yourselves. So, as I said, this is an area where we have sites that are being impacted, and we have a concentration of them. You're familiar with this landscape. You can see Castle Neck up at the top there, Choate Island, Essex Bay, Essex River, Steep Hill Beach, and the Crane Estate up towards the top of the map. And this is just another view of that satellite view. So the sites that I'm going to talk about are 80K Damon up here on Steep Hill Beach, I'm going to talk about the Castle Neck pre-contact period fish weir, the Essex Bay shipwreck, and the Canoma Point wreck. Ada K. Damon. Ada K. Damon was lost in 1909 in the Great Christmas Storm. It was a fishing schooner that had been converted prior to this last trip that it made into a sand schooner to harvest sand from Plum Island for use in making mortar for the buildings, the fireproof buildings that were all the rage in Boston at the time. There was a huge construction boom that was going on. And the farmer from Maine who bought the ship thought that he would make a pretty penny harvesting sand and bringing it to Boston. Unfortunately, they didn't have the Weather Channel, didn't have radar, and he went out in a storm that actually sank 16 other vessels in the state of Massachusetts and drove the Ada K. Damon high up on the beach. Ada K. Damon, for those of you who are familiar with it, it's been a kind of an icon and a place that a lot of people have gone to visit for a very long time in Ipswich. You see it being enjoyed here by picnickers at the first annual Crane Beach picnic in 1911. Oh, by the way, we don't climb on shipwrecks anymore. For 100+ years, the Ada K. Damon rested in its sand bed on the beach and would occasionally expose, like it's seen here. And it was the subject, when it had exposed, of 3 field schools that the board did with Salem State University to document the portions of the wreck that were sticking up and to do a little test excavation. Then in 2020, September of 2020, I had just started in May, new to the job. Hurricane Teddy passed off the coast as one of the strongest storms that had developed. It actually grew as it went north of Bermuda and passed by our coast as a strong Category 1 hurricane. Brought all the things hurricanes bring, high winds, high seas, and pounded our coastline, huge waves. The Ada K. Damon, as I found out looking at the CZM coastal erosion viewer online that any of you can check out, was located, as it would turn out, in a portion of Steep Hill Beach that is in this red area, which is an erosional zone. And if we look at shoreline locations over time, we can see that it is in an area where the shoreline had been retreating towards land. In the process of that, it become more exposed in that picture I showed you of it laying in its nice sand bed, and was almost completely exposed. Graham and Harold went down to take a look at it. There's an awesome video on YouTube of them walking around and Harold describing what he's seeing. It's 45 minutes long. It's fantastic. I'm so glad they did it. I had planned to get out there to do documentation. I knew it was exposed. The hurricane happened, and the rest, as they say, is history. So when I first saw Ada K. Damon in September 2019, it looked like this. After 2 tide cycles and Hurricane Teddy's passage, 2 king tide cycles, it looked like that. So what do? I got a phone call from the trustees saying, hey, you know that really nice shipwreck that we have on our beach? Yeah, it's wrecked again. And it's now scattered over the entire beach like pickup sticks. What do we do? It's kind of like when your computer dies in the middle of a presentation. It's not a good feeling to get that call and have be asked that question, especially when you're just several months into the job. And, you know, I hadn't encountered shipwrecks that had wrecked twice. So I said, well, the first thing is we have to ensure public safety. So contact the harbor master, ask them to contact the Coast Guard, put out a notice to mariners saying that there could be timbers floating in the water. Second thing is we need to document what's visible now before it gets reburied or destroyed. So I put together a team of citizen scientists, and we went out, we took some low altitude aerial shots of the wreck. And this is within several days after it had gotten ripped apart. We went and did precision GPS mapping of components of the wreck, and then did some detailed documentation of portions of the wreck that we hadn't been able to see before. So as this was all happening in a reaction mode, I was beginning to realize that, yeah, this really stinks that this beautiful shipwreck has been ripped apart. But for the first time in over 100 years, we're seeing parts of it that we hadn't been able to see. So yeah, there's a huge negative, but there's also a positive that's associated with these situations. The key is you have to respond quickly because the window of access to these recently exposed or disassembled sites is brief. Beaches are dynamic places, a lot of change. So here's a Google Earth image of the wreck when it was intact. Covered about 175 square meters. And a day later, it covered 18 acres. This is a photo mosaic that we produced using the drone photography. It's all geo-referenced. We were able to, in the matter of flying for less than an hour, create a very precise map of the wreck as it existed several days after it had been disassembled. So all those numbers are all associated with all the planks. Circled areas are the big sections of wreckage. The blue circled areas, the black circled area is the original location of the wreck. This is an aerial image of the hull. And the way this thing came apart was incredible. The bow is at the left side. That's the stem at the bow there. It's still, and then you have the two halves of the hull. And the port side of the hull extends all the way back to the hood ends, the very stern ends of the planking that fastened into the stern post assembly. You had the entirety of this 80+ foot long vessel get lifted like a zipper off its keel, and then like a chicken breast or a fish fillet get taken about 2 football fields down the beach. This is a huge and very heavy piece of wreckage. And the bow, the treenails, the trunnels, the wooden dowels holding the bow together, held the two halves of the ship together during the storm. It speaks to the quality of the construction of the ship. Documented the original wreck site. And then we were able to see, again, I said, this creates an opportunity too. We were able to see for the first time surfaces of the ship that weren't all broken down and eroded. We could see things like tool marks that tell us about the tools they're using to build the ship. So here you can see saw marks from the cutting of the planks. Here you can see the scalping from the adze that they use to shape the frames. Here's a little detail that's interesting. It's a repair, a little plug. And then one of the coolest things that we were able to see is the hands of the people who are making the ship, the scribe marks, identifying this timber, this floor timber, part of the ship's ribs or framing, as timber 13, and then this center line for where it should be placed on the keel. And you know, I've benefited. I got to know Harold in the last year and a half, and as a person who studies shipwreck archaeology, all the shipwrights that built the ships that I've studied, they're all long gone. Harold's still here, and Harold makes awesome ships, and not only builds them but designs them and sails them. It's an extraordinary opportunity for nautical archaeologists to have somebody like Harold that you can talk to and ask questions to that otherwise I would have to infer from looking at the shipwrecks. And the reason why I think marine archaeology and nautical archaeology is important is you think about the significance that shipbuilding had to this town, and then multiply that times all the other communities like Essex across the country, and the important role that shipping and shipbuilding played in our country's history. A lot of that history, a lot of that knowledge was knowledge that was passed on generationally from the elders to the younger people. It wasn't necessarily written down. Plans of these ships often weren't produced. Sometimes you just were working from a half-hull model rather than a detailed plan. And so the knowledge that these shipbuilders had, these American shipwrights had, the only place that it's preserved, because these guys are all gone now, is in the archaeological remains of these wrecks. That's what makes them important. That's why it's worth preserving them. That's why it's worth studying them, because it's the only place we can get the information. And while many people look at what we've done thus far with the Ada K Damon, we're letting it go back to nature. I've been asked numerous times, why don't you recover the wreck and conserve it and display it? Well, we don't, because one, we don't have the budget to do that. It's very expensive to do conservation. It's perpetual care. You have to care for that thing that you've now conserved forever if you're going to be a responsible steward of that resource. So instead, we like to think about a ship as having a life cycle, kind of like I guess all of us in a way. It's born, it's designed, it's conceived of, it serves a long life, hopefully, in its mercantile purposes. Then it's either abandoned, it sinks, or it's recycled and it's reused, or it becomes a shipwreck. And in a way is reborn as a tool for learning and enjoyment of people. So in addition to the documentation work that we did initially, we've since we created the Shipwreck Scholars Program. We created it not just to be an educational program, but also to be a citizen science site monitoring program. So the program was created for kids ages 5 to 12 and their families. And we started to run these programs that come out to the site. And every time we go out to the site, it looks different and there's new things that we see. And so the children that are participating in the programs become scientists and help us do actual monitoring of the site. And then because the adults wanted in on things, we created the Sunset Talk and Walks, I call them, to bring adults out to the site. And we did the exact same thing. So these educational programs became opportunities for us to continue to monitor the changes to the site. And the changes are significant. We have documented when that large section of wreckage became exposed a few weeks ago, we were able to record its position. It's migrated since the storm, so over the last 3.5 years, a quarter of a mile. This is important information because it allows us to think not just of this site, but of other sites throughout the state and what might be happening to them. So in addition to the Ada K Damon, we also had this pre-contact period wooden fishware that was reported to us by Dave and Maura Alger, who are here with us tonight, and who are great citizen scientists that help us an awful lot. But they reported this find that they saw on the beach that looked peculiar. It didn't look natural. And sure enough, it wasn't. I went out and there was a hurricane coming, and we thought that this probably could get destroyed by that storm. So they took me out and showed it to me. We took a sample, we radiocarbon dated it. The trustees of reservations, because it was on their land, they paid for the radiocarbon dating, and we got a date back of between that you get ranges. The date range was 500 to 575 years ago. So that's before European contact. And if you're not familiar with what a fish weir is, it's essentially a kind of like a fence structure that is used to catch fish. And they're also made of stone. What's important about this one is we only have a wooden fish weir in the archaeological record of Massachusetts in one other location, and that's in Boston, the Boylston Street Fish Weir Complex. So this is only the second place in Massachusetts where we have a wooden one that's been found. So in addition to the Ada K Damon, we also have this shipwreck, the Canomo Point shipwreck site in Essex. This was reported to us in March of 2022, March 2022, and we went out to take a look at it. Now, remember, I'm still bearing the emotional scars of dealing with the Ada K Damon and having to react to that situation. So you can be sure that I wasn't going to let that happen again. And so with sites like this, I'm going out regularly, 3, sometimes 4 times a year, to monitor changes in its condition so that when it does become fully exposed or more exposed than it is in this pictures, that I can begin to record a lot of details of its construction. So this picture was taken in October of 2023. So this is a little over a year and a half later. This is clearly in the process of exposing and eroding. We went out and took some aerial photography. This is another shipwreck site. This one's in Gloucester in Essex Bay. It was reported to us last February. Also, in an area where sand is retreating, landscape is changing, and it's eroding. Interestingly, the person who reported it, Steve Hemian, is the great-great-grandson of the builder of the Ada K Damon. So this is what it looked like in February. Remember that. That's what it looked like in May. That's what it looked like in August. That's what it looked like in September. Rapidly eroding. I've been told that I only know this through secondary reporting. I haven't been back out to the site yet this year, that it has started to break up. An aerial image of the site. We have a potential identity. Jude Seminara, the Essex Deputy Shellfish Constable, contacted me, had done a little bit of research, and said that there was a likely candidate for the identity of the ship, which was the schooner Active that was lost in 1852 in December, while it was sailing from Bangor to Boston with a cargo of lumber and drove over the bar and bilged in the Essex River. The schooner, and this is interesting, it wasn't insured because it was an older vessel. What's interesting about that is when we went out to look at it the first time, Harold came out with me, as did Graham, and both of them looked at it and they said, "Oh, this is an old one. This has characteristics that are different from the Canoma Point wreck or the Ada K Damon wreck." And those differences are in things like the sizes of the ribs or the frames, their spacing, how they've been assembled in the hull, which suggests an older technique of shipbuilding. So if this sank in 1852 and it is the Active, and it was old at the time it sank, and we know that ships lasted 50, sometimes 70 years, this very easily could be a ship that dates from the late 1700s or the early 1800s, making it one of the oldest shipwrecks that we know of in Massachusetts state waters. There were ceramics that we found on board the wreck. These ceramics, the slipware and these yellowware, feather decorated plates, these have a kind of a terminal date from between 1840 and 1870. So that fits the 1852 timing of the Active. And that would indicate the latest that this vessel could date from. So it dates to sometime before that. These are ceramics from the Canoma Point wreck, and they date to a later time period. These are more solidly mid-1800s to late 1800s. And based on what we see in its construction as compared to the Essex Bay wreck, I think this one's more mid-1800s, maybe 1840s. Now, why are these things exposing? Okay, so I'm not a geologist, but if you look at, this is an old Google Earth image taken from 1985, showing the locations of the Canoma Point wreck, the Essex Bay wreck, the Castle Neck fish weir, and a newly reported stone one up here. Notice where those channels are. I don't know if I can toggle between these. And this is an inset map from 1832. This was the oldest one I could find. It had any detail to it. This is 2022. 1985, 2022. Look especially at where the fish weir is located, and where the Essex Bay wreck is located, where the Canoma Point wreck is located. Look at where the channel is for the Walker's Creek right here, relative to where the wreck is, where the channel is relative to the Essex Bay wreck, and then here compared to basically today. This channel's changed drastically. It's pushed to the southwest. Walker Creek has also pushed westward. It's no longer over here. It's now here. That's what's exposing that wreck. This change in the channel is exposing this wreck. And this has changed dramatically. The land that used to be out here is now all gone. And this channel right alongside where the weir was. The weir is gone. The land that it was on is completely eroded. So that's an update on the things that we've been doing for the last 3 years. If you're wondering what you can do, I had mentioned the SHIPS form before. If you find anything, please, 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 you don't even have to fill out the form, just contact me. I'll come out and look at the site. But if you're somewhere where you're not likely to get back, take a picture and use your cell phone. You've got GPS on your phone. Record a position in the notes and take a picture and then contact me and I'll help you fill out the form and report it, because it's you folks who really are the eyes on the ground that are preserving our state's underwater archaeological resources with a little help from me. That's it. Thank you. And my apologies for the intermission earlier on. I don't know why that happened. Be happy to answer any questions. That's always a warning, like, uh-oh, this is gonna be a really great question. Okay.
Something like the weir.
Yep.
Why would you either suction up the sand, expose it all, or blow it out with pressurized water? Just expose it, take a picture and then.
Because that would accelerate the destruction process. I would have gone out to do more work. But remember that hurricane that I mentioned was coming? Sometimes it fills in, sometimes it doesn't, sometimes it just rips everything out. Because you can create a whole different dynamic for the water flowing in the river across. Now you've got a hole there. It could actually cause more scouring. Kind of like that picture that I showed of the Essex Bay wreck. So you see what's happening here? That's what it looked like when we first saw it. The stern end, which is towards us, was completely buried in the sandbank. But because this wreck was sticking up and it changed the flow dynamics over that area of sand, it creates scour. And that's why this is eroded out like that. So if I had done what you suggested, I probably would have accelerated its destruction. So it's just a decision that I made at the time.
But you have a good view of what was there.
We would have,
Yeah.
but again, got the phone call, went up the next day, hurricane coming, they need to get their boat out of the water. You know, there was a lot of dynamics that were influencing things that prevented us from being able to do that.
So that weir is gone.
It's gone. At least this portion that had been exposed and the land that it was on, it seems like it's completely eroded away.
People ever use LiDAR? Yeah.
Yeah, LiDAR gets used mostly in terrestrial archaeology, but there are situations where it can be useful for near coastal shallow water. So the intertidal, if the water is clear and the light can get down through the water column, it can be useful. And the way that it's typically useful, you've seen it. You asked the question, so you obviously know what you can see with it when it works for us for identifying sites. It reveals things that aerial photography can't see. You know, it can go through the leaf, the leaves on the trees and see the ground and bring out subtle little nuanced differences that are produced by people in the landforms that would suggest that there's a site there. So yeah, we could use it in the near coastal area in some cases. Yep.
Have you ever heard of the early sites research center?
The what?
Early sites research center. It used to be in Raleigh.
No,
Interesting, but it's disappeared in time. I don't recall.
were they the ones that did the early work on Bull Brook?
Mhm.
On the Bull Brook side here? Yeah, I guess I've heard of them, but I never interacted with them, had a chance to interact with them. Yep. There's a center like that now at Texas A&M that started after I left. I wish it had been there when I was there. Or definitely.
Did you ever, follow, maybe like Edward Rose in his work?
Yeah, when I was a young guy, when I was a kid growing up in Narragansett, Rhode Island, yeah, I used to take his books out, the Lighthouse book, especially, I really enjoyed.
He had a bunch of shit, but.
He did. Unfortunately, he was a better storyteller than he was a historian. And in my new job, I've had to deal with some of his facts being a bit suspect with prospective permittees. Yeah, and he's a good writer. Yeah. Yes.
I see on Facebook, et cetera, in Salisbury Beach, they're discovering old marshes with footprints on them and sometimes wagon tracks.
Yep.
And I'm just wondering if you study those or you just think that's, only 150 years old and not.
It's really interesting. I saw it on Facebook too, and I said, "Oh, I got to get out there. I want to take a look at these things." Oftentimes, they're exposed in the National Seashore on Cape Cod as well, and the National Park Service. That's their jurisdiction. We don't have jurisdiction there, though we do collaborate with them quite a bit. I haven't get on out to see those. I've seen them on Block Island, so they're, I don't want to say common, but they're definitely there.
Yeah.
Up
Yes.
on Plum Island, I've heard through the years about numerous reports along Plum Island of things showing up after storms, especially on the backside of the bay side of what could have been payloads of ships on the inside because the ship built, the beach built out through the years. In the days. Whatever, do you have any information on that? And the other thing was, there was this, I believe it was the Salem Harbor Master, that wrote about a lot of shipwrecks and things in the North Shore area.
Yeah.
I can't think of his name, but it was all.
Ray Bates. No. Yeah, I haven't done any field work out on Plum Island. But I'm aware of
It's a
the,
very transitory beach.
yeah.
And things here and disappear.
So one of the things, I didn't put a slide in, but one of the things that I think we're gonna adopt in the state is something called the STAMP program. And it's a program that was started at the University of West Florida. And a grad student there created a system of tags that had QR codes on them that you could affix to ship wreckage, ship debris. And anybody with a cell phone could scan the tag, basically do the same thing that we have with our ship's forms. Scan the tag, it would immediately connect them to a national database that then they could take a picture, put in the GPS position, and it would be recorded in the database. And so it would allow us to track statewide, working with citizen scientists. We'd have kits that would be distributed regionally that would allow people to go out and tag these things, and would allow us to, with the national databases assistance, track these things. So we understand where they're going, where they're getting exposed, and what circumstances, which would inform our management and make it less reactive and more proactive. So what you're describing, yeah, it happens a lot. We usually get, for whatever reason, people when they're on the national seashore, they often contact us to report what they're seeing, and then I let the Park Service know. But we usually get about a half a dozen of those kind of reports a year.
Very, recently about roughly,
No,
I know people use the guideline.
they still do.
Certain things already their spikes.
Yeah, it's the system that we have of the exempted sites, it's in that system and, you know, it predates me, by a lot of years. And I don't fully understand why those sites were selected. I think it was because they were well-known and heavily visited and had already been disturbed, so New Hampshire is one of those sites.
I have a couple from the chat, from our online, portion of call out, if they can be
And then
involved.
I'll get you.
One is, request for pirate ghost stories with these shipwrecks, please.
That'll be next time I come. With a different laptop.
Let me get to the next one. There's also do you ever do, aerial prints of the aerial photos? Down.
We haven't, but if somebody's interested in having one, contact me. MABUAR. Resources belong to you. I work for you. The image belongs to you.
And the last one I saw there was, a request to see again a slide, page 17. Yeah, page 17 for the, what is it? The list of all the locations of totals of shipwrecks in the beginning of the class.
All the shipwrecks from the beginning of the talk.
I think probably you have one of the maps that is, yeah, is it the map one with the color coding?
That,
This is map, maybe that one.
this one?
Probably the next one that I'm not sure. One of all the communities. Like Foster's spread and the hot spread and.
You had your.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I know. I passed it?
Yeah, was it the red dots on the, showed so many of them up on the North Shore?
Was it the one with the dots or was it this one?
There.
So red is over 100 reported wrecks, yellow is 26 to 99, and blue is 1 to 25. And you notice that they're associated with places that are early ports or heavily trafficked ports like Boston, or stick out into the ocean, like the tip of Cape Cod, Nantucket, and Rockport. Was that the map they were asking about?
You think so?
Okay,
Yeah, no confirmation, but.
okay.
No.
Wait, one sec. I have to, he's had his hand raised a bunch of times, and I get to, sorry. Yes, sir.
Last week in March, there was a Woods Hole oceanographic research vessel just off Plum Island under the creek there. Any idea what they were doing?
None. My son was just on a Woods Hole oceanographic research vessel, but not at Plum Island. He was
Okay.
offshore.
About 20 years ago, there was a commercial diving vessel off Plum Island. It was side. And over the years, there's been a lot of reports that people do find things along the beach.
Mhm.
And a British revenue ship supposedly went up on Plum Island back in the 70s or something.
Mhm.
With a payment of $1,000 for the cruise.
Yep.
Cruise based in Boston. They all information on that. Yeah, so it's a national park. Yeah. We can't really take anything from that park.
No. Where did you say? Off of Plum Island?
It's on Plum Island. Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Coming from, being an expert for 30 years, 40
Yeah.
years, I did this stuff.
I wish I had $1 for every ship that was carrying money for payment of soldiers it's not the only one. I mean,
I have a similar story to that.
there's a lot of this.
For many years, he was 70, I think, or so at the time. And when he was younger, it's like born and bred, he was walking the backside of Plum Island. Came across this area of like, this encrusted area that looked like black silt. And he picked up a bunch later and put skimming stones. So as he continued to walk down the beach as a youngster, he was skipping the stones. Well, he left a couple in his pocket that he didn't realize, and the laundry got washed, and it turned out he had really silver coins.
Yeah, they're
That was on
there.
the backside of the beach,
They're there.
but the beach is
They're definitely there. I never cease to be amazed by the things that we find underwater. And one of the things I didn't mention is what makes, as you can see in the timbers that were preserved, that were buried under the wet sand on Steep Hill Beach and the 80K Damon. I've dived on sites, Stone Age sites in Denmark, where wooden objects, food, organic material is preserved because it's been buried in an anoxic environment, kept wet, kept dark, kept cold. The marine, the underwater environment is an incredibly preservative environment.
And like the Essex marshes as well, this thing get buried in those, and
Absolutely,
10,000 years old, and the timbers are still.
absolutely. There was a piece of wood that came out of a site that we were working on. It was a 7,000-year-old site. And it was, when you make a dome tent, you get those ridiculous things that have the elastic in them that you have to put together, and then you run them.
Yeah.
You have to run them through the holes and get them to hold your tent. Well, they had dome structures, kind of like the Weetus that people here built. And they used saplings as those frames, and they would burn and sharpen the ends of them to make them stronger and harder when they jammed them in the ground. So we were excavating the site, and we came upon one of the bottoms of those wooden pieces. And when we brought it to the surface for about 30 seconds, it still had this thin layer of bark. It looked like it had been cut yesterday, and then it oxidized and turned black very quickly. But that was almost three times as old as the pyramids. Yeah, so the preservation of an underwater environment is extraordinary. And the argument that things need to be brought up, otherwise they'll be destroyed that are underwater, it doesn't really hold water, pun intended.
Breaking news, and we're in Massachusetts, about these shipwrecks, ecological sites.
You just got it.
Yes.
You just got it. But there'll be more. Hopefully I'll have a chance to come back and update you on what we learn as we go.
I have one further. I was just thinking, on your website, you have a list of all the wrecks, right?
We have a list of all the exempted wrecks.
The exempted. Those are the ones on it.
Those are the ones you can dive on any of them, but those are the ones you can dive on and actually do it's called casual artifact collection.
And the ones that aren't exempted, you have listed those, but not their location.
So by statute, by law, the locations of underwater archaeological sites are not protected by the Freedom of Information Act. They're not public information. So we maintain an inventory.
Is the Portland included?
No, it's in federal water. There's somebody had a question over here.
Oh, I just wanted to say, I've always read and or heard that there is a petrified forest out there. Yeah. Oh, they may not be petrified. They're supposed to be large forests. I have no idea.
I've seen in a couple of places on the Massachusetts coast in the last few years. They're not petrified, but they're tree stumps in places that trees don't grow anymore. They're submerged. They're subtile, shallow subtile, just like that one I showed you the picture of. So I have no doubt that there's those things. And please, if you see stuff like that, let us know too. Because it's those preserved ancient landforms that are likely to have. They're going to be the only places where we have in situ or primary context ancient native sites.
About 15 or 18 years ago, after a series of winter storms, it might have been the period of time of the Mother's Day storms, We had 100-mile-an-hour winds.
Mhm.
The following spring, I noticed in front of Clarence Beach, there had been a great big huge mound of sand. Big huge sand dune is now a valley, near the standing forest strip.
Yeah,
It had been buried and
because what happens is as the coast migrates landward. And it's always these, it's these topographic lows. You remember that picture I showed of the kind of the buried paleo channels? It's the margins of these water bodies that when the shoreline is retreating inward, it's pushing sand, it's pushing the dune face back. And that sand and upland material is being eroded and sloping in to fill these low areas. And then the wave face migrates past them. And so all the erosional force is now either inland or above these areas that are buried. And that's why it's those types of places that we see get preserved. And if you compare it to terrestrial archaeology, when we do terrestrial archaeology, typically we look for settlement sites and habitation sites on elevated, well-drained soil. Those aren't preserved underwater from what we've seen. It's the margins of water bodies. And those would be low probability, we think, when we do terrestrial archaeology, but for underwater archaeology, it would be high probability. And they're extremely important zones because that's where humans are interfacing with the water. They're hunting, they're fishing, they're harvesting ceremonial materials, medicines. So it's an important landform that we have preserved offshore, and it's a landform that's going to have organic artifacts that you don't find on land in the underwater context. In Denmark, they're finding sites that are submerged. The organic artifacts are about 2/3 of the assemblage that they find total versus the inorganic.
Was that earlier you showed a picture of spot central map? Is that the drawing? Is that reservoir? Not shipwreck, but areas in which you have oversight over.
So we have shared jurisdiction over the resources in the Quabbin with DCR.
Is there anything there? Was that flooded?
It was flooded and they bulldozed a lot of what had been there that wasn't removed. So a lot of the Quabbin is kind of been flattened. But not all of it. There's definitely some things that are still there.
Yeah.
And getting in the Quabbin to do survey work is a bit of a challenge, and it's something that actually I've been talking in the last year to folks at DCR, the archaeologists at DCR about.
I also saw a little star, I think it was give or take around Lake Chitchut, might be in your venue of underwater archaeology,
What was it?
Lake Chitchut. There's another little red spot.
Oh, a star.
Listed.
Yeah. Oh, that was the star map, huh? That was this way. That might have been an errant star.
Just guessing about where it was, it looked like Lake Chitchut.
You may be interested in this. It's kind of a long ride from here, but the Hassanimisco Nipmuc tribe, they're a permittee of ours, and they're working on a project in Lake Quinsigamon between Worcester and Shrewsbury, where there are 3 dugout canoes that are contact period canoes that they believe are associated with their tribe, which was there at the time. And they're going to be making a machine on Flint Pond, on the banks of Flint Pond, at the beginning of June. So if any of you are interested in seeing that process, which is pretty interesting, you'll get to see every day, contact me and I'll send you the details. Yeah.
Last year.
Oh, yeah. So people may have seen it. Yeah.
Is it possible that the active was built in Essex?
No, it was built in Maine, according to the newspaper account, but newspaper accounts are,
We had a couple on our festival list, but for early, we didn't have to, no, that's what we have.
you do? Oh, I want to know more.
You have to drive back tonight,
Yeah,
here in Banter,
Jamestown.
Jamestown.
Yeah. Took me almost 3.5 hours to get here tonight. Car accidents.
Get back in too.
Anybody else have a question? I'm happy to stay. Oh. We wood sampled one of them and it was pine. It's pine.
I've never met a state archaeologist.
State underwater.
Underwater.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It's nice to meet you.
How long was the history of snow?